minute to kind of catch up. And I know like there's like usually a lag. Charles, can you
Yeah,
see if it does it look like it's live yet on
I
your side?
believe. Let me check.
Because it's never immediate. It looks like it's live on here, but then when you look on the site, it sometimes it's not. So
Yes, we are live. We are live. We are good to go. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
oh, I will just start with a quick introduction. You guys, welcome back to Taji's World of Books. And I am so excited to have my co host Charles from Books on Stereo. You guys know Charles, he's back with us again.
Hello.
And we have been talking for weeks and weeks and weeks. You know how excited I have been about having one of my favorite authors on, and that is Charity B. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
So this is going to be a fun time. We've got a pretty packed agenda of things that we want to talk about today, of all of these wonderful books that you have put out in the world for us. And so I thought we would just kind of dive into it and kind of do a little bit of a chit chat and see who joins us with some Q&A and kind of go from there. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Fantastic. So I always like to start by asking authors to tell me a little bit about your beginning of writing and what your impetus was. I thought I read somewhere that your love of dark romance really came out of reading C.J. Roberts, right, her Captive series, which is one of my all-time favorite sort of captor-captive situations. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your beginnings.
Yeah, I used to read primarily fantasy, like YA fantasy. And the 50 Shades of Grey series was the first romance that I had ever read. And, I loved it. And then I looked for books like it and I found The Captive in the Dark. And at that point, I was like, Christian Grey, who, like. So that I had never known that there could be books like that with like the explicit scenes, because I remember in Twilight I was like, man, I want to see it happen, and so I didn't know that that was actually in books. So that just opened it to a whole new world in the genre of dark romance, and I knew this is like my jam. This is where I want to be. So it just kind of spiraled from there.
And it's so funny because you hear similar stories where I sort of started off in fantasy. I absolutely love the fantasy genre. And then I was really like, why am I reading fantasy? Oh, I'm reading it for the romance. I'm reading it for those interactions. That's what I'm living for. And so then you kind of graduate into the romance genre. And then I think I read Captive in the Dark. I read a Penelope Douglas, her series, and I was like, what is going on? This is what? You can do this? Like, how is
Right. This isn't illegal.
coming back from this? He just kidnapped you and whatever. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then anything from there was just like, well, that doesn't even compare. We got
Right.
That is so true. Taji will go like, if we read a contemporary, she's like, why are you whining that he didn't text you back? I have another girl that got kidnapped. Give me some real trauma in this book. I'm like,
Right.
Taji.
conflict over here, and you're mad because you like misunderstood what he said. Come on.
No, that's exactly it. It doesn't have enough punch at this point. It's like I've desensitized myself to the point that I need a little bit, more extreme type storyline.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your writing. Like, what's your writing process? Like, how do you come up with? Because we're going to talk a little bit about. You go from like a taboo romance with a brother sister crazy kind of Addams Family situation to we'll talk about that in a minute, to a cult situation. So your stories are, or to like drug addiction and dealing heavily with like substance abuse and assault. So they range. Tell us about your process in terms of how you come up with these stories, and when you sit down to write, are these characters screaming in your head, or what is that like for you?
I mean, it really starts off with a seed of an idea, a basic overall, what I have a lot of vibes, like the vibe that I want the book to have. But I'm definitely a pantser, I just kind of sit down and let the words kind of, bleed onto the keyboard. Some characters are very loud. Tobin from my Sweet Treats books is the loudest character to this day that I have ever had. And some characters are a little bit more difficult to just kind of really get to the root of who they are. So for me, it just kind of really depends on the book and the story. But like Anointed was very personal. I took a lot of, not that ever was in a cult, but I took some personal experiences and, translated that into that story. And then other stories are just so off the wall that the characters just kind of tell me what's going on. So it really just depends on the book itself. But I am a pantser. I don't really outline too terribly much.
So you just, like, it's a stream of consciousness when you sit down, just kind of just stream what you're hearing and what's kind of channeling through you.
Right. And so occasionally I will write a scene that may be chapters ahead in what I'm on, but if I get that, that urge, I will write that scene out when it's fresh and, new in my mind, and then, place it in later type of thing.
Do you try to log words every day? Do you try to write on a daily basis, or do you write as the muse sort of comes through you?
Oh, I definitely want to try to write every day. It just depends what life allows. But yeah, no, I don't wait for really the inspiration to kick in, but I do get that urge quite a bit. Like, if I'm listening to a song or something like that and I'm not able to sit down and write, it's like, oh, I have that urge to do it. But no, it's whenever I have the opportunity to, I'll sit down and try to get some work done. And it's not always writing, it can be research. It can be, what I have written, I will try to outline as far as like a calendar. So I know the days that, this is happening and things like that. So it's not always writing, but just working on the story itself.
Yeah, because I imagine there's timelines that you want to make sure everything lines up. Or if you're researching, like you said, like with Sweet Treats, like with Tobin and that whole storyline, I imagine there was a lot around drug addiction and substance abuse and what that's like that you had to research in order to make it, because it was so realistic and it was so consistent with what one would expect.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it did involve, a lot of research, because I didn't want it to be, I think movies and stuff can get away with stuff that is just not realistic, when people get an idea of what something is like from what they've seen on TV. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be, as true to, what would really happen as possible. So yeah, I watched a lot of videos and YouTube videos of people, coming down off of, their high or whatever. And it was just very interesting to me from what I had originally thought of this being like to the reality of the situation. So I have a lot of fun learning that kind of thing too, really seeing inside, these characters' thoughts and, just life in general.
Yeah, for sure. And I could see, we'll get into the books in a minute, but I could see why Tobin is the loudest, because his storyline and the arc and what he went through was so traumatic, and he had so much to say. And I love that you wrote that. I'm in the middle of the third book now.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
I wrote that third book to describe what happened during those 5 years and that time, because we heard about it, but we didn't see it. And now we see motivation behind why he did what he did. And it's like, like mind blowing. It's like, we'll get into that later. But in terms of the writing process, tell us how long you've been writing and how you started your writing career, and because you're an indie author, so what that process is like for you as well.
Well, originally I did not know indie publishing was a thing. Like, I didn't know it existed. And I was writing a fairy trilogy that I was intending on getting traditionally published. During this time, I came across the Captive in the Dark books, and the Sweet Treats story latched on, and it was like I kept saying, oh, I'll write it after these fairy books, but I just couldn't do it. I had to stop writing the fairy books and write the Sweet Treats books. It was all I could think about. And through the Captive in the Dark, I learned about indie publishing, because when I went to look at traditional publishers, the restrictions that they have were not going to fit what I wanted to write. I mean, they weren't going to publish it, bottom line, and so I knew I wanted to traditionally publish at that point. And so I just tried to kind of watch other authors that I enjoyed and I liked reading, and just kind of tried to follow their path that they had laid out already, and kind of see what they do from there. But it was really just kind of organic in the way that it just kind of led me to this path of writing.
Mm-hmm. and being able to write what you want, right? Like not having like restrictions or being
Or
curtailed
deadlines.
or deadline. Exactly. Like it's really much more fluid and up to you in terms of what that process looks like.
That
Right.
is absolutely why I indie publish, is full creative freedom, and not only what stays in the book, but the cover design, just the way that I choose to market. And I mean, there's just so much freedom in it that I would lose if that was through a traditional publisher. So, I don't know if I could ever do that, even if, the opportunity arose, just because that's giving away a lot of power. And I guess I'm a little bit of a control freak when it comes to,
Yeah.
the books. Yeah.
For sure. How does that, and as you saw in our title, we're called Addicted to Audio. So we do all audiobooks, and we also talk about the audiobook process and then the narrators and that whole thing. And you don't have any books on audiobook at this point. And I wonder, is that a conscious choice, or is it difficult, or is there a plan to get some of these books on audio, or what's your thoughts about that moving forward?
I absolutely would love to do audio. It's a very expensive process, and if I'm going to do it, I would like to do it in the way that I want to do it, which is the narration of every time she speaks, she's narrating. Every time he speaks, he's narrating. None of this, he's reading her parts type of stuff. And that's very expensive because you're hiring two different narrators, but there's also a lot of editing and stuff that goes involved in that. So money is really the main reason that has not happened, just because there's so much that goes into it, and there's so much I need to research. But it's such a huge industry that I do want to get into it. And to hear the books come alive like that would be amazing. But I am big on, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it, regardless of how long that, may take, type of thing.
It is like giving life to the story, right? It's a very different experience when you read it versus then because I often like have the book in front of me and I'm listening to the narration as well. And it really does take the story and bring it to life and give it a whole new, volume or depth to it. And so it's just such a cool process. And so whenever we're able to hear books on audio, we always want to promote that as much as we can. So we want to make sure that we're promoting you and getting you out there so that you can move in that direction.
Thank you. Because that is definitely what I would love to do with all my books, but I have a few that I specifically really want to get into audio. So fingers crossed.
Yep. So Charles, do you have any other like the basic questions that you want to ask before we get into books?
Yeah, talking a little bit about dark romance, like as you know, there's always this huge stigma that dark romance readers have, and there's always like a little coded language that readers and authors have. When Taji recommended me R.I.P, I was like, oh, she said, oh, it's crazy, it's dark. I was like, Taji, you missed so. I was like, I had to praise you, Charity, for keeping that book on Amazon, because I remember when Nyla K released Double Edge. I was like, why did you put that it was incest? Like, we all know in the dark romance world, like, you don't have to say it in the actual book. And I was like, it got taken down. I was like, I'm like, power to you, Charity. I was like, hanging on there. I was like, how did Amazon not catch this? I was like, I bow down. I bow down to all dark romance authors who can continue to have their books on Amazon. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you as a dark romance writer, what do you think really kind of separates dark romance from, like, let's say, a heavy hitting contemporary romance? Because I feel like a heavy hitting contemporary romance can be in a lot of ways deal with like suicide or like a lot of dark triggering issues. But it's interesting when you say dark romance and it becomes like, okay, what are you doing? These are all moral. Like, we don't condone any of these, but you can do it in, like, let's say a rom-com and use it and sometimes can get away with it. So what are your thoughts on that whole dark romance discussion?
And that's a fantastic question, because I do think there's a little bit of crossover between the two, as far as like, they both do deal with heavy subjects, and they both talk about things that people are uncomfortable discussing, in a normal setting. But I think dark romance really allows people to dive into maybe fantasies that are supposed to be shameful. And I don't feel like contemporary romance really deals so much in the fantasy side of it. They're more with dealing with the issues. And I think that it's good that people know that you're not a freak because you have, a rape fantasy or whatever. That's actually a very normal thing. And it allows you to safely explore that that fantasy without putting yourself in a situation that, could potentially be dangerous or just out of your comfort zone or whatever the case may be. So I feel like as far as those almost taboo fantasies that nobody wants to talk about, dark romance allows people to explore that, in a safe environment. So I think that's the main difference, but they both cross over, I think, a lot with those issues.
Yeah, that's what I was curious because I was like, there's some. I remember when Kerrigan Byrne released How to Lose a Duke or something in 10 days, and the first chapter opens up on a sexual assault, and there's no warning, and readers just had a riot. I was like, dark romance. I was like, I could consider that dark because it was pretty graphic. Like, so I definitely see that crossover a little bit in between. And also, too, as a follow-up question, one of the things that we talk about with dark romance when some authors will just like put very explicit scenes to just shock and awe. In your books, it always feels very grounded and for the story. So, what is your stance on like even if it's like craziness happening or whatever, it all feels necessary to the story. So, how do you kind of approach that process where you kind of toe that fine line? Like, do I show more or do I show a little bit less or do I show it in full for the full impact of the story?
That's actually kind of like a thin line to toe, and I do question sometimes, am I going too far? And that is a question that I ask frequently in some of these books. Am I going too far? But I think the biggest thing that, for one, it should not be, if you're dealing with child abuse or, sexual abuse, I don't think it should be glorified or romanticized. I think that you should see the horror of what is happening and be disgusted and be just horrified by it. I put that in there for that reason, because if you can be horrified and disgusted by what that character is going through, you are going to be more sympathetic to maybe the questionable choices that they make later, or, the things that they do later that you wouldn't normally do, but now you understand what exactly they went through, because me telling you, oh, this happened versus you seeing what happened is going to have two different impacts on it. Mm-hmm. So for me, the biggest thing is that it is going to help the reader understand the character better. It's going to help the reader sympathize with the character more. But yeah, I try to not romanticize anything that is not supposed to be romantic. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you try, and I like that you say that it helps you to understand, because oftentimes with morally gray characters, they engage in behavior and you're like, what? I don't even understand.
Like, excuse you, you did what? But then also my dark romance mind is like, go darker.
Right.
Do it. I was like, just go there. I'm like, just go there. Just like do this and do this, and then like, okay, let's come back to our happy. Cause I love that like a really great author like you can like take you through like the darkness, and then somehow make me like the couple at the end. I'm like, what is like why? Like I feel like my emotions got like twisted and flipped on its head. Because something I'm like, oh, my love language in dark romance is completely different than regular romance. So like kidnap captive,
totally.
like all those different things. I'm like, oh, that's so nice that he kidnapped you. I'm like, and people look at me like, what? Did he say what?
It's almost like dark romance allows you to completely suspend everything that you would actually do in real life, and it gives you this just like fantasy fun world that there's no, and I think that's what's so fun about it, is it brings you in these horrific events and you're almost like, oh.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
He killed a man for you. I'm like, that's so sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I say, like, I tell people I love dark romance, but it's one of those things where I go, like, clearly in real life I would not condone this, but in a book I'm like, absolutely, like, what, like, I want to see he's gonna kidnap her, fantastic, like, all right, here, because I want to see that arc. I want to see, like, okay, how is this author going to take me from every atrocity that he's done, or that whoever the hero, whatever they've done, to the other party. How are we going to get from that to an HEA? Like, I can't, like, we got to see where you take this. And then when we do, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was masterful.
Like, what a ride. Yeah. You want it to be a ride. I think that's the biggest thing. Whatever the case may be, as long as you had a ride with it, I think that's all I can ask,
For sure. Yeah. And so one of the first books that I wanted to talk about is a dark paranormal romance, as you've defined it, and it is Incubastard. And it is, I feel like it's a play on Christian lore, right? Like but also bringing in some Greek mythology and some other sort of tropes or archetypes, right? And so
Right.
characters, I don't want to give any spoilers, but the main characters are Mishka and Locke. And Locke is a prince of hell, right? He's the son of Amadeus, if I remember that correctly, right?
Yeah.
And he has a job that, he has certain jobs in the realm of hell that he lives in. And it seems like he basically, when they first arrive in hell, he's delivering the torture or the punishment on an ongoing sort of basis. And he revels in that. And he's content with his job and everything that he's doing. He's cool with it. He's got a number of lovers or people that he sort of interacts with, and he's content with his life until such time as Mishka and what was her best friend's name? I don't remember. Lena. They do a spell because Mishka has gone through, I think her long-term partner, fiance, whatever, cheated on her, and she's down and depressed and trying to recover from that. And Lena's like, girl, we need to get you together.
We need someone to demon for you.
Then we're going to find somebody. Not realizing that this is a legitimate thing because Lena dabbles in sort of black magic and Wicca and those kinds of things, and they don't recognize this is a legit spell. And so they summon Mishka, this prince of hell, to their realm, and they kind of are stuck with him until such things happen and things develop from there. Would you say that that's a decent setup of that?
Yeah. I think that's a good overall explanation.
And I think that the dynamic between, because I sort of thought about a prince of hell, Mishka, I expected him to engage and behave and have a particular moral compass. And he really is very different than what I expected. Like, some of the things that he sees, he looks at an action with a little girl that a gentleman, a guy sort of perpetrates, and he's like, oh, hell no, this is not okay. And he acts on that and does some things that he sees as, wreaking justice upon this guy for what he's done. And that's not how I would have expected a Prince of Hell to act. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts when you wrote this and what messages you were conveying and what did you want your reader to kind of take away?
I wanted it to be almost that the demons and everybody in hell was not necessarily bad like we had explained them to be. They were simply doing their purpose and their job that they had been sent down there to do. Mm-hmm. And for them, they're punishing evil. That does not make them themselves evil beings. And I don't think that they see themselves as evil beings. In fact, they feel that they, especially like Lucifer, feels that he was wronged by his death. The whole situation, in heaven, it was an unfair situation. So he doesn't feel, he feels more than the victim more so than the, the bad guy or the evil guy. And so I really wanted it to be almost a fun take on, because one of my favorite genres in the whole wide world is dark comedy. I didn't necessarily want it to be a comedy, but I wanted it to have almost a lighthearted undertone to it, even though there's some dark subjects that are being discussed. I like mixing that light and dark, and I thought that having that almost comedic, overtone sprinkled in would kind of add some fun to it. And his personality just kind of ended up being really fun anyway. I wasn't fully expecting that, but he did just kind of come out as this kind of fun, lighthearted character, and he's this demon prince. So that was really fun for me. I had a good time with that. But yeah, I didn't want him to be like evil and just like, evil. Hey, I wanted him to almost get a bad rap. You know what I mean? Like they've been misunderstood type of a situation.
And it comes across in that he names the little girl that he cut, like he names her Pygmy. So like, just the fact that they're like, why are you calling her Pygmy? That like that his dark comedic sort of humor comes across in that way. Yeah,
and he's very literal in some ways. Like, he said that he does not like the sarcasm is just not something that clicks with him, so he's very literal. And, she'll say things like, what on earth? And he's like, it's not on earth. And, like just very literal reaction sometimes.
And you can see of all the books, because at this point, I think I've read everything that you've written. So of all the books that you've written, this is the lightest of them all. So you can tell that there is a light undertone in it. And also I thought was interesting when we do find, and I'm not going to say like who this character is, but when Michael comes into play, you expect angels to be this light being of goodness, but when you look at the actions that Michael perpetrated and why he did what he did, it almost seems like, well, that was really
Hold up.
selfish, and that's like a flip on its head in terms of what you would expect.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of like the family dynamic, I mean, you got the black sheep and then you have the perfect child, but sometimes that perfect child's the dick, and the parents don't always see that sometimes, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of a little bit of a play on just like a family dynamic too, that, angels are very almost non-emotional, to where demons are full of life and very, very just vibrant, and angels are very stoic and just kind of, so I wanted to kind of do that opposite, but I think it's fun to kind of flip it a little bit and think of maybe the angels aren't exactly the good guys and the demons aren't exactly the bad guys.
Yeah, and I think that plays into, no spoilers, but like with one character and discussion of like LGBT in the book. I won't spoil for people who haven't read it, but I really love like what our main hero said in that moment. When I think it was like near the end. I don't want to spoil the scene, but like I really appreciate that scene because like a lot of like religion is a lot of times very kind of anti towards LGBT, and I love that you kind of flip that on its head. Because when I was reading, I was like, hold up, wait. I was like, wait. During the steamy scene, I was like, wait, that's not the right. Hold up. I was like, hold up. And I was like, oh. And I loved it. It wasn't like a defining characteristic of that character. So was that conscious that you wanted to do that in the book as well?
Yes, I didn't want to come across as preachy but when you're dealing with somebody in the LGBT community and you're dealing with the religious subtext, I felt like it needed to be something that was going to be discussed. I mean, Lena's parents were extremely, religious, and, it had a bit impact on the way her life went. So I did kind of want to discuss it. And if somebody's constantly telling you that you're a sinner and you're going to go to hell for what you do, when you meet somebody that's actually part of that world, of course you're going to be curious and, ask. And so I wanted that to be a discussion, and I wanted to do it as respectful, as possible without being preachy. But I definitely wanted to have that discussed and made very clear what the outlook on that was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also, what I really liked is, and it remind me of this. So with Locke's character, he hasn't had, because he's a prince of hell and he exists in one of the realms of hell. He hasn't had a lot of contact with humans. And every time he does have contact with humans, it's always, he kind of senses that depraved, sort of perverse nature of humans. And I can't remember, is it that whenever he meets somebody, he knows exactly what they're thinking and he can sense their soul and the things that they've done over history? Because he sees like all the negative and bad things that people have done. Remind me of that he can do.
When he's in hell, he can physically like see their memories and, see their sins and the things that brought them to hell. That's going to be a different interaction than when he's dealing with living humans. Living humans is more of, he can taste the emotion that they're feeling. So if they're scared or whatever, but he can also get almost like, not read their minds, but he can get almost like an idea of what they're thinking. Like he can get the intent of what they're thinking. So with humans and dead humans, it's kind of two different interactions, with people that have sent to hell versus people still living on Earth. But you can't read their minds or see everything that they've done. In hell they can, but not the living humans.
Yeah, for sure. So just because a lot of people, especially on my channel, have asked, and I sort of told them, okay, tell me about Charity B's books. I was a little bit nervous about reading it because I'm new to dark romance. And so I said, wait till the interview, listen to what we're talking about, and then you can kind of go from there. So having said that, with Incubastard, I would say that if you're into paranormal romance, if you're interested at all in dark, this is the lighter side of dark, like you said, with a little bit of a comedic undertone. Everything has an HEA. What else would you say? Like if somebody is sort of thinking about reading this, like who do you think that this would appeal to, or who would like Incubastard?
Yeah, definitely people that have already liked fantasy and paranormal, because I think if you don't like fantasy and paranormal, you aren't really going to be into this thing. So, obviously that. But people that have read dark and want to keep going darker, I think that would be my biggest thing. Is they've started with dark and they're safe with going darker. I think that would be a good place for them to be. If they've already read something that they felt like, oh, that might be too much, then maybe not. Like, I don't know, dark is subjective. So what some people are going to be, triggered and upset by, other people aren't going to be, just because it depends on your experiences. But this would definitely probably be the first book I would recommend of mine, just to kind of dip your toe in and kind of see what you're dealing with. But yeah, I would say somebody that's been in dark romance and wants to, keep going darker and hasn't been triggered yet, that would be a good place for them to read that book.
I agree.
Yeah.
Anything? Would you want to add anything to that, Charles, or are we good to move on to the next book?
No, we can move on to the next book.
So let's talk about. I'm trying to go from for typical.
Or you're saving the granddaddy for the end.
I am. We're gonna inch into it. So from there, let's talk about Anointed. And Anointed, and it was really funny because Charles and I had talked about this, because I was like, it's some cult stuff, it's like
Taji was just screaming at me like, you have to read it, you have to read it, you have to read it, you have to read it. I'm like, I was like, okay, I'll read it, and I'm like, I'm just glued to the book, and I finished it in a day.
I love it. And that's my longer book too.
I flew through it. I was like, your books, I don't know how I do it. I just get so sucked in. I look up, I'm like, I should go to bed, but I can't stop reading. I'm like, dang it. But I love that book and what you did with the cult and some of the atrocities. And two, not to spoil it, but revelations come out in the end that I really like that you had that discussion in the book as well. And I was kind of like, the way the cult methodology and their whole religion, I was like, okay, yeah, I can see that being an actual thing that could exist in our world, and how it being so twisted and warped, and you don't shy away from those things, especially just some of the things that happen to the male and the female characters in this world. Right. I was like, some of the scenes I was like, oh, I told Taji, I was like, oh, I did not expect Charity for you to go there. So what was the kind of idea that kind of started this story for you?
This is, like I said, this is probably one of my more personal books. I was raised, in a religious background, preacher grandpa, preacher uncle, that and I've seen a lot of just the damage that, purity culture and just things like that can have on people. So I kind of wanted to take it to an extreme level, because I didn't want to touch on any one religion. I didn't want it to be, offensive to anybody. So I made up my own religion, and just kind of took a lot of things from other religions as inspiration, and because a lot of it is very similar, to be honest. It's got a lot of similar things between different religions. So I kind of took those ideas and just tweaked them into the Anointed, and the just blind faith and just the willingness to put up with so much for the sake of your belief and your faith in your God, and I felt like that was really the main message of how powerful that can be for people, when they truly feel like their soul is on the line, and they believed it with their whole heart, and and then to find out that everything that anyway, it was just, that was the biggest thing for me, is just really the impact of that blind faith, and, being told that this is the way it is, and really not having any, you can't ask questions, you can't question, be too curious, because that's not, that's frowned upon. But yeah, anyway, I just really wanted to touch kind of all that. So it was a heavier, more emotional book for me personally. And I really wanted them to have to choose between their faith and each other. That was in an early concept. I knew that was what I wanted to happen between the two main characters.
And that really came across. And one of the things that I thought about, that you made me think about, in having been raised in a very religious family as well, is, what if my beliefs, or what if the things that I've been taught that my whole life, right, or all of us have been taught our whole lives, if we come to find that there's a different way of life or a different way of thinking, how would we handle that? And what would that look like? And what would that process of acclimation and reacclimation and separation and all of those sort of interesting concepts, what would that look like? And so I think it was a really hard hitting look. You know, there are some really hard things that happen in this book. So you got to check out the trigger warnings. But I think it's an accurate account because whenever, and we've already sort of said that this is about a cult. And so whenever we hear about stories about these circumstances, there are some really horrific and horrible things that happen that are very apropos at the time, and talking about women and how women are treated and, you know, respected in societies. And it just really, there are parts of this book that I wanted to throw the book across the room. And I was like so angry and frustrated. And there were other parts of it that I was crying, and other parts of it that I was really excited and happy. And so I went through the gamut of emotions in this, as the characters did, because it was a ride, right? And they were going through confusion and frustration and, you know, anger and depression and sadness, and like you just were there with them through all of those emotions, and you wanted to just, you know, take them by the and just like rescue them, but you can't because they have to do it themselves, you know.
And you're from the outside looking in, as much as other people, when we look at other people that are in cults and in these brainwashing situations, we see it like we don't understand. But, I wanted to make you understand, why people get this way, how it gets to this point, and it's when you're raised in something and you're shut off from everything else. I mean, that is going to have a huge impact on the way that you think and the way that you believe. And, just the Benji character was very fun for me because he really had so much inner turmoil and just really struggled with, what he was taught versus who he was. That was a really special character to me. And I'm hoping to one day continue and write his story, but we'll see. I've got so much stuff on my plate, but I've wanted to write Benji's story for a while.
I was hoping because I was like, I want more from this character.
Yeah. I loved him.
Yeah.
And I do like how you have like a character that our heroine meets later on in the book that kind of serves as like kind of like that outside read, like how we are reading the book. You're like, why would you want to believe in this faith when they did X, Y, Z to you? And why would you? Because like, as a reader, I'm thinking that too. I'm like, this is like clearly like someone wrote this on like the back of like a menu pamphlet and like said, here's a doctrine, believe in it. So like in my mind, like this is crazy. But like even after everything that happened to her, she still is like clinging on to that faith so strongly.
Right.
And I love that. I wanted to ask too, was this a conscious decision to follow them? Because I think this is like the longest time you follow two characters in any one of your books, because we meet them when they're like 7 or 8 and you follow it may not be, but
Sweet Treats books, I think they're about I mean, yeah, it's the same Sweet Treats and Anointed as far as the timeline that we follow some of the characters.
But you followed them for such a long amount of time, and was it something conscious? Like, because I feel like you needed to understand the context when they were kids, and what happened when they're a couple years older, and then like fast forward to like a couple years later, because then you really do get that bond and that their love for each other is like something that's defying what their religion is telling them.
Right. Yeah, I did I wanted you to see that journey from, their childhood to the adulthood. I didn't want to even do flashbacks, you know what I mean? I wanted you to be there in the moment and watch it happening. That was a big part. That was important for me because it was a bit of a coming of age, type story in some ways. But yeah, they are actually, there are some big time jumps. But I did feel like that it was necessary, to get the full picture of what actually went down from beginning to end.
And, and that's one of the things that I mentioned when I did the review on this book, is that one of the things that bug me in books most often are time jumps, because in contemporary romance, I feel like they're unnecessary time jumps because it's like a miscommunication thing, or like I thought I saw something and I'm just going to leave and never talk to you again. And then it's like
2 years later.
Yeah, and you're just
you're like, what?
What the hell? Whereas in this, you needed that. Like it was necessary and handled well. And I completely understood why it happened and the way that it went down, and was like, actually, that was legit. Like that, it made a lot of sense in that respect.
Thank you.
But I also wanted to touch on, so like, not only do you have this indoctrination, not only do you have the relationship between the hero and the heroine, but then you also look at familial relationships. And I thought it was really interesting at the very beginning of the book, the dynamic between the main character, I believe her name is Leanne, and her sister. And when her sister sort of, because her sister is quite younger, and she is also indoctrinated into, this process or this religion, this organization, and she thinks she's doing the right thing, and the ramifications of what happens when she's asked questions and she answers those questions, and how that leads to this long term, and then where we end up towards the end of the book.
Right.
Makes me sort of go, wow, because I was mad at first, and then I was like, wait, can I really be mad? And you sort of went through what Leanne went through, which is like angry, frustrated, want to lash out, but then like rationalizing with yourself, going, wait, no, like you're in an impossible situation as well. So we're all like screwed over in this
Right.
dance,
It wasn't a clear cut. Nothing was done really with anybody's full consent. A lot of things people were forced into doing, so it's kind of hard to be mad when you know that, what else were they going to do, type of situation. And there was a lot of that in this book, just the choices people made. I think they felt like that was the choice they had to make. Like they didn't really have another choice.
Yeah, for sure. So now this is defined as, I think you called this a dark romance or a psychological romance. And because it does end in an HEA, but there are some really, it's about survival. For me, it's a story of survival, and what you're willing to do for the people that you love, and what does that look like, and then, like I said, it's got some heavy hitting, hard hitting, dubious and non-consent situations, and one situation towards the end where you're just like, oh,
I was like, Charity. I was like, hold up. I was like, they are not doing that to her. I was like, no. I was like, first I was like, ow.
Yeah, I do squirm sometimes writing this stuff.
I was reading, I was like, but I love it. Like, even for those more explicit scenes, I don't feel like you ever like go over where it's like, let's do like 10 pages of like this one horrific scene to like
Right.
really convey to the reader what's going on. Like, you see it happen on page, so you get what's happening, so you're not like shying away from it, but you actually confront it. And like, I was like, oh wow. I was like, it feels like even it's like more than a romance. Like, there's so many other things that you can pick and pull from, like from your discussions on religion and like cultism, that I feel like kind of like elevates it a lot of ways. So I was like, this is like, I love the romance, but I also love everything that happened within this cult, and like was so interested in what was going to happen with everything. I was like, man, it's like that must suck to get all the way to the end and then like not have things turn on its, I don't want to spoil it, have things turn on its head in a really crazy way, because like I was just like, man, like like so many lives and so many especially for the children, like what do you do afterwards when you're
Right.
raised up in an environment where you're raised to think a certain way, like even when you're outside of that context. 'Cause that's like the same thing when you grow up in like a certain religion all your life growing up. Like, it's hard to sometimes shake those beliefs or relearn things. So I really love that journey that you took us on with those characters. I was like, I flew through the book. I was like, Charity. I was like, Taji. I'm like, don't throw another Charity B book at me, because I'm gonna read it in 2 days, and then I'll be like, okay, now I want to read everything dark. Let's see how dark I can get in my romance. I was like, content warning. I'm like at the point where content warning.
Oh, that's like
That's like
content warnings. I love them. If I don't see a content warning, honestly, I'm not going to read it. I need trigger warnings and content warnings.
I just love when authors know, like, some readers don't read. I'm like, yep, that's me. I was like, I use it as like, that like tempts me. I'm like, I see dub non-con. I'm like, okay, tell me more.
Yeah, continue.
More.
I'm intrigued.
I was
Yeah,
like, tell me more.
it was funny because like I think Charles had, because we had originally were like going to do R.I.P. We were going to do R.I.P. and Incubastard, and then I think I started reading Anointed, and I was like, Charles, you got to read this. I know this is
You just pulling my leg. I was like, okay, and it's like, like, cause we were like into dark romance. I think me and Taji, like, we get each other in our levels. Like, we can go pretty dark.
I love it.
Before we get like, hold up, because we do like it when books go dark, but we always wanted to make sense to the story. Like, I think we talked about this one book always that had a pretty explicit rape scene in it, and we were both like, to this day, we're like, why was that there? Like, why did I have to feel that
Mhm.
viscerally for the character when in the context of the story it didn't really mean anything? So
Right.
that's like one of the things when I find dark romance authors like you who do that, who don't do that, but I mean like it makes sense for the story, and like you don't. It's like same thing when you see like some things in horror or some
Mhm.
things that characters have to go through in horror. It's necessary to understanding the plot of where the character needs to go. So I love that in your books, everything, even if it's bonkers crazy like in R.I.P. I was like, I get it. Like this is like a messed up situation. I'm like, I would probably be the same way if I was brought up in that family. I'm like Adam's family that likes to kill people. I'm like actually kill people. I'm like it makes sense for the story. And that's why I love like in your works, like you make it make sense for the story.
Thank
It's like you
you.
don't read a scene and you're like, Charity, okay, why was that there? I'm like, what were you doing there? It's like, yeah, okay. Like I need to see those scenes to fully understand and sympathize. Because R.I.P. I was
Right.
like, who are these characters? I'm like, oh, I was like listening to Taji. I'm like, I just want to go into this book and slap these two main characters. I'm like, get it together. But then I also understand. I'm like, oh yeah, you guys didn't have a chance. Like, look at your parents. You guys were a
Right.
hot mess from the beginning.
Right. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that I want to convey in most of my books is I want people to kind of look at a person that maybe that they would judge in real life, you know what I mean? A
Yeah.
person you would have your preconceived notions on. And I want you to look at this person and see this person and realize, you know, that maybe your judgments are too harsh or you're not understanding, you know what I mean? And maybe think about the way you judge people in real life. And that was kind of like a big thing with the Sweet Treats books, and that's kind of continued on to my other books is, you know, I want people to look at a different way of living, or I want people to look at a way that they may see as taboo or crazy or judge or whatever, and maybe understand them a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So let's talk about R.I.P. because we got to get to like the granddaddy that we went on to talk about. So like we're gonna get to it. So R.I.P. I came across R.I.P. and we were talking about sort of advertisement and other people talking, and I was like, and that's just like candy. You're just basically saying, come have some candy, and I'm like, oh,
You're telling Taji read this book.
totally. So somebody was like talking about R.I.P. and they were saying how they weren't able to finish it, and I was like, what? You weren't able
I
to
was
finish
like,
it?
that's the book for
Okay. I
me.
was like, okay, like I get. And I read it, and I think I messaged you right after I read it, and I immediately ordered more of your books, like because I was just like, I need more of this in my life. So R.I.P. is about two siblings. I'll keep it short. It's about two siblings, and they are raised with parents who are morticians or undertakers. They basically work in a mortuary, and you quickly start to understand that the mother at some point is having some mental health issues, and she believes that she's getting messages from these bodies or whatever about evil deeds that people have done in this life, and they believe that it's their responsibility, the parents believe it's their responsibility to go out and rid the world of people that are doing evil things, but they wreak or justice on these people for what they have done. And they very quickly, at the age that they believe is appropriate, bring the children into this behavior as well. So they're like these avenging angels that are going out and finding these people that have done pedophiles, like people, maybe somebody that's stolen money, that done bad things in the world, and they punish them and make them suffer for the bad deeds that they've done. But then as you get more into the story and you hear about the parents and their relationship and the children and their relationship with each other and with their parents, you start to recognize that whatever faith or religion they are of, they don't believe in medicating for mental health issues. And as a result of these mental health issues, there are certain behaviors that the mother and the parents are exacting on these children. And also you're seeing that a mirroring of that mental health issue in the daughter as well. And so that pretty much, right, is the setup of the story.
Right.
And what I tell people about this book is you cannot read 10% or 20% of this book and go, oh, it's not for me. Well, of course, check out the trigger warnings, of
I'm like,
course.
you can, but like you have to read the whole arc to get
You
the
have
full
to
sense
read
of
the
the
whole
story.
arc. And then once you've read everything and you see where the story evolves and ends up, then come back to me and say, oh, it wasn't for me. Fantastic. no problem with that, because not everything is for everybody. That, and I totally understand that. But if you think that you can comment on it and you know where it's going, but you only read 20% and you haven't given it a full chance to kind of evolve and become what it is going to become. And so tell us a little bit about R.I.P. Because I was like, this is like, when I say the Addams Family, I say it with all like love, but it's like the Addams Family.
But like they actually kill people.
I know, I love that, because there was definitely some Addams Family inspiration, you know, as far as like the visuals and some of the aesthetic. I did take some Addams Family inspiration from there, but this story was crazy. This was actually one that was originally in the Thou Shalt Not anthology. The first part of it was. Yeah. So it started off as just me trying to think of a story that would work with the Thou Shalt Honor Thy Father and Thy Mother. And it turned into this crazy story. And I knew that this is not done. Like, this is not done. Like, we have got to keep going. And when I started writing the second part, so that's why it's split into two parts, but it's only one book. It's because the first part was in the anthology and the second part was what I wrote after. But I don't, like I said, I don't want to give any spoilers, but when Adriel begins to show signs that she may have inherited the mental illness from her mother, there's a scene in the playground that is probably my favorite scene.
I remember that scene.
And this book was just a blast, you know. Like I said, I'm a pantser, and so I just kind of write. And when that kind of came about, I was just like, oh my god.
I was like, I would never want to cross this girl, like, at all. Like, I could just laugh at her and she would give me like, here, have this drink.
She was so insane that she made me laugh. Like, she was just so over the top, like, just.
I have visions of her like in this pretty frilly dress, like flouncing in the flowers with a little broken doll, and then she like wipes by you and she like slits your throat.
And then just like walks along like it's nothing. I love it. The brother is like, okay, maybe not just kill random people that like maybe calm it down. Like, yeah, she may have the girl may have shoved you, but did she really deserve to die because of that? I'm like, oh my goodness.
Poor Malachi. Malachi was he was like the most normal maybe in the book.
Most of everybody.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I love what you do with Malachi's character with no spoilers. Like what some of the things that he goes through at the hands of his mother. I think that was really nice to see. But nice to see that type of representation in books, because like you usually mostly times to see it like in the reverse, where the female is getting that. But I really love that we got to see that and see his evolution journey throughout that whole thing, and like him really, even after what happens with his mother, he's still carrying that trauma around.
Yeah.
And I think that was something I was like, oh, I really like, you don't really see that a ton of romance. It's usually the other way around.
And that was a big reason I did it, because it's I feel like it's a lot more common than people know, because it's, for some reason, when it is reversed like that, there's a stigma to it. Like, there should be some level of shame there, when, you know, it's no different than when it's done the other way. So I did want to put that in there for that reason, because it's not discussed enough. And, you know, I have a son, and so that relationship between a mother and a son, that would be traumatizing. Like, you would never heal from that. Yeah. So, you know, I wanted to show, you know, that pain and that anguish, and, you know, he will never fully heal from that, and I wouldn't think you would. And that's another thing I want to do in my books, is they go through heavy trauma. They aren't just going to be all okay. You know what I mean? It's a journey.
Fine at the end of the book. Like, all my issues are solved.
They're healing. They are doing better, but it's, you know, I like to leave you with the knowledge that they're going to still have work to do to heal. You know, they're still, for the rest of their life, probably. But at this point, they're on the journey to heal. They've gotten past the worst of it.
Right. Reality. That's how it is. It's not all like daisies and like roses after this. Like, there is a long path. And I also like what you did. So two things I want to say in R.I.P. with around those scenes that we're talking about. I like that I saw it from him. I saw it from the mom, and we saw it from Adriel. And so, like, at first I was like, wait, what? And then I was like, what's going on? What? And then I heard it from another POV, and I'm like, oh, this makes more sense.
And
You
then
know
it
what
kicks
I mean?
into
And so,
place.
depending on the POV, it's a very different set of circumstances about how that really comes up, you know?
You said that because that was, I mean, I wanted to do that. I kind of wanted you to open it up with like, okay, what? Like, what is happening? You know?
What's happening?
And then it clicks and you're like, oh, you know, like, got it, you know? So I love that that's the way that it worked out for you because that was kind of intentional.
And that's why I say you can't read 20% of the book and then go, not for me. No, because then
Like,
now
not
you
for
get
me.
the whole thing.
I was like, if you don't finish the book, you never see the uncle twist. I was like, as we were talking about that, I was like, wait, hold up the phones.
I want that story. I want to see where that goes.
I was
was
saying,
like-
that's another spin-off that I'd love to delve into. Oh my gosh.
When that
I
came
love
out,
that so much. I was
I
like,
was
the
like,
uncles are on it too. I was
whoa,
like,
I'm
oh
here
my
for
goodness.
every minute of this, right? When that came up, and then the partner, and then the whole like kind of like organization, I was like, where's that book? Did she write this?
I was like, where's that book? I was like, we need this book now.
I love it. Yeah, that was definitely. I've heard that a few times that people have wanted his, and when I started writing him, I knew that I wanted to do more with him, but I just not enough hours in the day, man.
No, there's not, and we know. You guys are only human. You can't like mechanically just be cranking out stuff, right?
Like,
I wish, yeah.
You know, but to your original point, I just wanted to say really quick, I also am the mother of a son, and I like you said, I read dark romance, don't have many triggers, and I was like, I don't have triggers at all. And then I told Charles I read this one particular book, and I was like, I hit it.
Yep.
I got my trigger, and that was around grooming. Grooming, and it was grooming, of a young boy, and I was like, why would you write this? Why? And there was no redemption, or it was just there was no. It wasn't a dark romance. I just don't even understand what it was. And I was like, how did I stumble upon this? And that's my sort of area, like you said, like you don't recover from that. And you're not supposed to recover from that. And it's really tough and difficult and it's far reaching. And me as the reader of that particular book was like, I can't go here because I have a son and I would die. You know what I mean? So,
Right. And I try to, I want you to see the horror of it and I want you to really almost feel what that character is feeling. But I do try to put a level of, just taste in there because I don't want it to come across as like, like torture porn.
Yeah.
I mean, at least not in those situations. Every once in a while, kind of, yeah, but not in that, in that type of situation. I want it to be horrific so that you can see and feel what that character went through. But I do want to be respectful in it as well. And I think some of those books can just almost not put the emotion in there. I think you have to have the emotion. If you don't have the emotion and you're just seeing the horrific acts, it just comes across as just like, okay,
Yeah. And this is full, it's full of emotion and you feel the emotion, especially from Malachi. It's Malachi, right? Malachi and Adriel, like you're there with them through every step of the way. And also particularly without spoilers, when Adriel thinks something is happening with her and she's not able to discuss it with Malachi and she takes matters into her own hands. You're just like, oh my gosh, don't do
like,
that.
oh my goodness.
Just wait.
I was like, let me go into this book and let me straighten these two characters out. They probably would kill me if I came anywhere near them.
I mean, because she's very immature for her age, and but she's also got this just twisted thought process that is beyond what somebody her age should have. So it's almost like you've got two sides to this twisted little coin. She was a fun character. I absolutely loved writing Adriel, just her cute little sweet, almost innocent, and then she's not like at all, know what I mean? Like
don't take her for granted and don't close your eyes on her because
I know
she will be on you.
That'll be like one where I'm like behind a locked door with like a security system with 4-layer. I would have eyes on you all the time.
Right. Nobody is safe, really. I mean, unless you're Malachi. But don't look at Malachi. Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, that party situation. I was like, girl, you better back up.
I was like, you better hold up.
But it also had like a supernatural kind of a feel for it as well, because, at the beginning, when you find that the angel visits the mother, right, and tells her about the bad deeds that this corpse did, there's a little bit of a thing like where you go like you later find out that he actually did what it is that she believed that he did.
Mhm.
So you're like, okay, she's got mental illness and she's clearly, schizophrenic and she's got some things going on, but at the same time, she's able to correctly identify these characters or these, perpetrators for what they are. So it kind of like makes you go, what's going on there?
Right. I mean, I think she had, very good intuition that had kind of like morphed into this thoughts of grandeur, like she was, had this purpose. So I think that she could maybe have a gut feeling, and because they went and they did their research, they made sure, that they knew that these people were deserving of the punishment that they got. But I think that she just was very in tune to having that gut feeling that this is just not a good person. And then when they go and do their research, they find out that she's correct. So yeah, I did have a little, I see what you mean about almost having like a supernatural feeling to it, because these weren't just random people, like these were really bad people. So that's a, interesting way to look at it. But yeah, I think she was just very intuitive, and then it just kind of translated into her thinking she was meant to do this.
Yeah. And then just really quickly, and I know Charles hasn't had a chance to do this, and Charles was like, Taji, I knew you were going to do this, but really quickly, the Crooked Spoons and the Sweet Treats and that whole Candy Coated Chaos, I think that was your first trilogy that you wrote. And the reason I bring it up is because I see a similarity with Malachi and Tobin in that they are very similar in their need to take care of and protect, people that are around them, their siblings, or, someone that they view as a sibling. So in Sweet Treats, you have Tobin and Tavin that are neighbors, and they sort of grow up together. And Tavin is raised in a drug addicted household where her mother is a heroin addict. So she is not caretaking and taking care of her, and really leaves her to her own devices. It is not there for her, doesn't send her to school, doesn't bathe her, doesn't do anything. The basic needs are just not met. And Tobin, their parents are sort of do drugs together, neighbors. And Tobin sort of comes in and acts in that role when they're about 10 years old. So he bathes her, he teaches her to read, he educates her, he feeds her, he does all of those things. And through a series of successive events, they get sold to this pedophile who ultimately abuse them and sell them then to the highest bidder for various perversions and kinks. And it's what their life is like. And he also hooks them on heroin and drugs. And so when we meet them, they're adults, Tobin and Tavin. And Tavin meets somebody named Alexander. And we then try to sort out this drug addiction and what this girl is, and what is a sweet girl, and what is all this, and what does all this make sense? And how does this all make sense? And it really is a harrowing story of escape from trafficking, addiction, and redemption, both within families and what that looks like. And the very people that you direct your anger towards and rage towards might be the very thing that gives you life ultimately.
Right.
And so it's a very profound story. There's a heavy substance use, but it's not just substance use for the sake of substance use. It's like, I'm using this as a coping mechanism and a tool to get through this miserable existence that I've been thrust into, and I've known nothing else. So I don't know how to even escape this. So how do I even do that when people are demanding that I make change? And that, in essence, would you say that, did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
And it's very interesting. You can see that your writing style and the way that you wrote this is very different than the latter books that you've written. And so maybe as you first started off, was there a hesitancy to kind of put things out there? Or did you want, or, in a dark romance kind of way, or, tell us about that. Because I can see the tone feels a little bit different than your later books. It feels more earnest, if that makes sense, but gentle.
These were the books. I spent 3 years on these books, and they had gone through major changes, from the original. And I just think it was my learning curve, really. And so I think I put a lot of things. I was very detail oriented. I put a lot of details into it, and things like that, which isn't bad. But I think the more that I wrote, I think I just was a little bit more editorial on the things that I chose to put in there. But this was my definitely a love project. Like I mean, for the first 2 years, I donated like a certain percentage to the Love in Her Arms charity. Yeah, just because this is a very, very special project to me, which I do plan on revamping the whole series within the next couple of years, just because it's so special to me. But yeah, I think the biggest thing, it was just a learning curve, and it was just such a project of love that I think I just put so much detail and just so much into it.
Yeah, and so when you say it's very close to your heart, it's a special project. So, like, are you talking about like the trafficking and escaping of trafficking and like trying to figure out how to live life after that, or the substance abuse component? And like, what is like, how do you put yourself out of that, and how do you exist and live life and build a family and all of those things after that?
I think honestly, the biggest thing about these books was I've never felt what I felt with this with any other book. This was different. I almost felt like they were my friends, like they were real people. Like it's hard to explain. Like I don't know, they just felt like real people, and they have stayed in my heart. Like they have a place in my heart. Tavin and Tobin specifically.
Yeah.
And I feel like I know every character, and every character speaks to me. But these two, I don't know if they were because they were my first or what, but it's really the characters that, just made this story so, so close to me. The inspiration was definitely done from stuff that I had grown up seeing about, girls that had been, there was one girl that was in a guy's house for years. CPS had came. And they didn't take her, and she had kids with this guy. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible situation.
Yeah.
And I just remember just thinking of the horror, and there was a couple other stories like that. And so those kind of stories just kind of got in my head, and what that person, and I remember seeing her in an interview, and she seemed so normal, and she seemed so like at peace, and I just couldn't fathom how she could have gone through that and be the way that she was. And so, that kind of started the inspiration of Tavin. And then I started seeing scenes, between her and Tobin and her and Alexander. And it just,
because it feels like a very Charles, for you, it feels like the house next door, that's a very normal household that you would have no idea that these things are going down in. And then when you start to develop, and like I said, it really reads like the first two books are a duet, and it's their story, right? Because you're kind of plopped in the middle, and then you go backwards and you figure out what happened, and then it brings you, okay, now we're here. And the second book is like, how are we going to fix this? What we're going to do about it? Right. And that kind of, it sort of wraps up. And then the third book, Crooked Spoon, is more like a prequel. You're like, okay, now you heard about these years before. Now let me tell you what happened. And so then it like all comes together. And the things that you thought that when you were upset with Tobin, because he was like kind of interjecting himself, and you're like, why are you doing that? When you read the story, you're like, my heart, and I'm halfway through it, my heart is breaking for him, because I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that this is what you did and why you did and how you felt and what happened. And it's very heart-wrenching, because if I would have known that, I would have wanted it to end in a very different way. You know what I mean?
And that's the main reason that they were written this way. I didn't want readers to fall in love with Tobin and then almost be disappointed because Alexander is the love interest. And because they do go through extremely horrific things as children, I didn't want to throw the reader in to reading just this extreme child abuse without having known them already as adults. So that was a couple reasons I did it the way that I did it. But I also like the idea of you thinking you know the story and then finding out that you don't exactly know what you thought you knew.
And that's 100%. You were like, well, I was wrong. Huh. But you're 100% right. If you would have done it the opposite way, I would have been disappointed. It needed to happen this way, and I need to feel this way. But then at the same time, I'm curious to hear how you're going to revamp, because at the end of the second book, which was, what was the second book? It was
Sweet and
Suffering. At the end of Suffering, we sort of see the wrap up, and there's some characters that we were introduced at the third sort of conflict act that we see that I'm like, oh, wait, who's that? And are we going to see more of them? And are we going to hear about their books later on? So tell us about the revamping that you're thinking of doing.
Really, the revamping is it's not going to change the story at all. It's just going to be new covers, re-edited, completely re-edited, reformatted, and just, re-released. Basically, I love the covers, and I feel like they fit the story very perfectly, but they are almost too artsy and too nuanced for people not understand. Once you read the story, they make sense, but that doesn't help when you're trying to sell the book to people. Mm-hmm. So I want to have a little bit darker covers that kind of, translate that these are darker books. But I do want to write Master Nikki. That's a story that I've wanted to write for a while. But yeah, the revamping won't be changing the main story. There may be, quotes taken out, things like that. But the main idea is going to stay the same. Everybody that ends up where they end up is going to still end up in the same place.
And I think it was, I can't remember, and I should have made a note of it, but I think it was like at the end of Suffering, it was like Nikki had wound up with like Clarence, and I was like, who the heck is Clarence? I was like, who was that? And where did he come from? It was some random, some person that she ends up with. Do you remember?
Well, Nikki ends up with the Master character.
That's what it is. Okay.
Master is the one that, Tavin worked for, was hired by for years. So Nikki and Master are actually together. But I think I really want to explore that because Nikki and Tobin's relationship was extremely complicated.
And I'm in that right now because I'm in the middle of that because that's what you're, we're just now where I'm at in Crooked Spoon is where we're starting to understand that dynamic
between him and Nikki. So I think it would be fun to explore her trauma, ultimately, is what she got from Tobin. And, having this relationship with this character that basically likes to inflict pain, for sexual enjoyment, for somebody that has been in this situation that was not consenting. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to explore is her hanging on and her trauma to Tobin with her moving on with this other, Dom type character.
Yeah, we see that where BDSM is used for healing purposes and you've taken someone that has experienced, trauma, and then you find a master or somebody that's an alpha, a Dom, but has it done in a very healing way, it can be done well and it makes sense, So, all right. So I just wanted to talk about that one really briefly. Charles was like, I know you're going to come at me, Taji, and be like, you got to read this trilogy. And I promised you I wouldn't do it.
Hey, me and Taji set a reading schedule, and then we had a reading sprint yesterday. I'm like, what are you reading? And she's like, you don't want to know. I'm like, you're reading the trilogy, aren't you, right now? I was like, and you didn't tell me. I was like, I knew it. I was like, we're only 3 books away from finishing your whole backlist.
I'm such a slow writer.
I was like, Taji won't be able to resist. I know it. And then she's like, I'm reading the 3rd book. I was like,
you know what it is? Here it is. This is what it is, Charity, right? Like I am such a purist that Charles and I go back and forth, and I'm known to, like, if I start a series, I can't read just one book, or I can't. Some people
just
read
book everything.
3. I'm like, how did you read book 3? Like, you can't do that. You got to start at book 1 and then go read from 1 all the way through to book 5 because I'm in the world, I'm in my fields with it, so I do everything all at once. Because if I read 1 and then step away and then come back, then I was like, well, I remember the plot and the storyline, but I don't feel the emotion, and I'm not like as invested as I was. So
then I'll just want to reread book 1. I'm saying the same way with TV shows. I want to watch them consecutively or read the books consecutively.
I'm like the one I can jump around and I can read a series, read half the series 2 years ago and then pick up right again. I'm like, oh, okay, I remember.
Wow.
It works. I can pick up if the author leaves me enough breadcrumbs, I can put it together. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this happened, and then this happened, and I just continue.
That would be nice. That'd save me a lot of time.
That's why when Taji's like, I read all in one. I'm like, I can't. I need my freedom to jump around and be chaotic in my.
Are you a mood reader? Do you read based on mood, what you're?
I call myself a chaotic mood reader. I don't know what mood I'm in until I find the book.
Right.
Gotcha. That's the mood I'm in right now.
That's it.
That's the book. Write a check. That's why I was like, I like to jump around, but then I have a ton of series that Taji has already finished. I'm like, oh, I'll get to book 5 through 10 at some point. It'll happen at some point. And I'm like, okay, maybe like how long ago did I read this trilogy? And I stopped
You know,
after the second book. What
yeah.
happened? And I'm like, okay, we're just gonna read the conclusion. We're just gonna continue.
But Charles does, like, we did a reading spree yesterday, and he's like, I'm going to read 2 chapters of this book, and I'm going to read a chapter of this book over here, and then I'm going to read a paragraph from this one. I'm like, how do you keep it all straight? Like, so he's reading 3 books.
Okay, I could tell you all the plots of those books. I remember, and they were all MM, which says something. So it was like all dudes, like I can keep them all straight, and I do. I jump around.
Hats off to you.
I jump around.
Yeah, I would say that takes skill because there's no way I'd get them confused. I'd be like, I thought this happened, but it was in a completely different book.
Yeah, that
Could
happens.
you imagine me, Charity, doing a review and I'm talking about 3 different books, and they're like, "That's not happening in that book." I'm like, "Oh, I'm all confused now."
That's why, like, never ask me about a review that I wrote for a book for like more than a year old. I'm like, I don't know what I could have been completely wrong. What happened in that book? I'm like, don't listen to me.
Yeah. So, okay, so having said all of that, I saved the granddaddy for last, and so let's talk about
The
Skeleton
Skeleton King, the book that everyone talks about. Like anyone who's like reads dark romance or any romance, they're like, you have to read the Skeleton King. Like you won't believe what it's about. And I applaud you because I was like deeply disturbed about what was happening, but I was also like, I need to understand why. And like dig deeper into this story, so I was like, "You didn't take it away." I was like, "I'm gonna continue on reading this because I was like, I need to know what's going on right now."
Yeah.
By the end,
Everybody was like, why? Like, I need to know why.
Me and Taji were just like, we need answers. Like, we have to continue on reading this. And then you read it like, oh, okay. Like, it reminds me of like The Wild by K. Webster. Like, you have to get to the ending for the rest of the book to make
for
sense.
The full, the full feel.
You're like, oh, okay. Okay. I get like why we started, but I like that you started like with like the more inciting incidents in your book. So like you really like you drop right into it and you're like, okay, what's going on? I need to read like what's going on. Like what you did what to a corpse? Hold on. Like hold on, I need to read more.
Go back and reread this for a second.
I was like, why is this? I was like, it's kind of steamy. So I'm like, I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, okay. But I'm also like, what? Hold on. But I guess like the first question to ask you is like, what started this idea for a story? I heard it was like A Nightmare Before Christmas.
I got invited to do the Heroes collection, Dirty Heroes, and it was all based off of Disney movies. And I had said, I'm not going to do any anthologies and collections this year. And then she said, well, we have Nightmare Before Christmas. I said, okay, well, looks like I'm doing this one. So I snapped because I, love Tim Burton, love Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, all that stuff. And so it was, I did not expect it to be because I love the movie so much and I wanted to do, justice to the fans, but I wanted, I'd never done a retelling. Every story I've ever done was an original story. So doing a retelling of somebody else's story was challenging. It really was because I didn't want to, obviously be copying, but I wanted it to be reminiscent of the original story. So it was, it was a bit of a tight walk. But the idea to make him with his certain proclivities, that was a pretty early concept. Like I knew I wanted it to be real life and not like, cartoony or fantasy. And I don't even remember, but when I got the idea, I was like, yup, I'm doing it. People are not, and I did not expect that many people to read it because of that topic. Yeah. It's my best-selling book.
I know, that's what we saved it for the end. I was like, it's a book that everyone mentions, like, you have to read this book. You won't believe what happens. I just like really enjoy reading it. I was like, why am I swooning over what's happening with these corpses? I'm like, why? I'm like, it's a love language. Like this is why like I have to like take my dark romance hat off sometimes.
Right.
And then I'm like, I'm over here rationalizing, going, oh, that's actually his love language. This is really cute. It's really sweet. And I love too, like what you find out, like doing a little bit of the flashbacks to find out some of his background. So did you already know his backstory before, or did that come like once you had that initial idea, like this is what he's going to be doing, and then I knew there was back end later?
I knew there was going to be trauma, but I didn't know exactly what. I figured that it was going to be a type of a shaming of sexual, sexual shame type trauma. But that was pretty much all I knew until I started writing it. The scene with his dad and his mom, that I didn't expect. That was pretty, with him holding her hand, that was like, oh my God.
I was like, oh my God. I was like, Charity. I was like, what is going on in this book? I was like, but like by the end, like when I talk about the book to people, I'm like, but I have to say, but it makes sense once you get to the end and like figure out the story. So people look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, you just have to read it.
I was gonna say it's actually a sweet book. I mean, you're saying that, but like the second half is a lot tamer, I think, than the first half. The first half really throws you into some craziness. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to almost get the worst of it out of the way, so you knew if you were going to be able to stick it out or not. If you could stick it through that first chapter, you're probably okay. But I wanted, one of those characters that are, or one of those things that are like a taboo thing in society, things that people are horrified by, and just, I kind of wanted you to look behind the curtain a little bit and maybe see that he's not the monster that you would expect, somebody that does that is, and I did learn through research that a lot of people that are into, that it's very similar to his situation. They aren't trying to hurt anybody, but they have deep, social fears and deep sexual fears of being with living women. And I don't think it necessarily makes them a bad person. I think that they need counseling, but I don't think it makes them an evil or a bad person, so I kind of wanted to show the flip side of that, because you hear somebody being, I don't know if we could say the word, but you hear somebody doing that and you automatically think, just scourge of society, gross, dirty, blah, 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 because there's a lot of, you're disrespecting the dead. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, connected to that. But I kind of just wanted to show that maybe it wasn't, just clear cut as everybody thinks, you might think it is, kind of thing. So.
And I guess it's really interesting. It's interesting about the things that you hone in on and that are disturbing or bothering to you. Because for me, I guess when I was reading this, like I expected that, right? So I was like, okay, that's that. But what really bothered me in this book was the relationship with the mother and the punishments that the mother dealt out. I was like, oh my, especially that one scene, and I don't think it's a spoiler, or I'll say this little spoiler, where she catches him, exploring himself for the first time and kind of trying to figure out that, and what she does with that. I was horrified and really upset about that. And then the other thing that really bothered me is the relationship between forgive me, what's her name?
Twins?
No, not the twins. The female character, her name was what was her name?
Sarah and Fink.
And Fink. And when he brought in the dog treat dude.
Oh.
Yeah, I know that one of those first scenes. I know what you're talking about.
Yep. Like those are the things I was like, so like the other stuff, I was like, Josh, this, I was like, what the heck? Like, so it's interesting how I honed in on that,
And it is funny. I've had, one girl reading my books that there's like one thing that triggered her, and it was not what you would expect. Like out of all the horrific things, she was fine, but there's one like off the wall thing. She was like, nope. Okay.
That's the funny thing about dark romance. Like you could be like, I have no triggers, and then you find like one tiny little thing in a book that you're like, wait, am I triggered by that? I'm like, but I was okay with reading like all the. I'm like, okay.
Right. Like he can stab a hole in somebody and screw that hole, but I swear if you kick a dog, I am done.
Right.
I am done.
How dare you?
How dare you?
But I also love that you created this town, because I think it was funny when Charles and I first talked about this. He's like, "What town is this? And where are they?"
I was like, where is this all happening? I'm like, hold up.
But they created this sort of utopia, if you will, for deviants, right? Like for people that don't want to be judged, that want to exist. And I love that there was like a rule around, they had law and like
Yeah, they had
things
Law
that
and
like you
Order.
could do and couldn't do, and there was a council and that whole thing. And when everybody sort of, so I do want to read more about what's going on at this town and the players. And I'm assuming in the Dirty Heroes collection there are more people that the other characters or other writers are writing about in this world, right? That happen in this town.
No.
It's different.
They are all independent stories based off of their independent Disney movie. The only thing that really connects them is there was like thousands of years ago, a curse released this evil into the world and it got put into these dirty heroes. So each one of the dirty heroes was the recipient of one of the evil things that this person had let out into the world. But so some of them are going to have magic in them, some of them aren't. It's very individualized to the author.
Oh, interesting, because I thought I was going to get a book on Augie, because I was going to say, well,
No.
I wanted to know how he became so perverse.
Right?
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I love the skeleton. That I would say between that and Incubastard, those are my two top favorites.
Oh,
Like, I
really?
just think of one moment where the heroine in Skeleton King is like, "I wonder if he'll choose me over a corpse, choose a corpse over me." And that was the one moment I was like, "I love this. I love you, Charity." Like, I love that the character had that thought because I will never see that in another romance ever again.
Yeah.
I was like, I love this. I was like, I love this. I was like, that is true. Like, that's very true that he could just go, you're not cutting it.
Yeah, you because Charles said to me, because I hadn't read it yet, and Charles was like, "Have you read it yet?" I was like, "No." He goes, "I'm just gonna say this," and I like to go into books blind. Like I don't want to know anything. I just want to like be surprised. And Charles is like, he's like, "I'm gonna say this one thing. You have to see if he's gonna choose a corpse over her." And I was like, "What does more? Shush." And I was like, "I gotta get to this book."
That's how I'm gonna pitch the book. Like always, like that'll be how I started off. I love that. I just love that. I just love that. Like some of the little details with the heroine. I was like, when you mentioned like that she squirts, I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, these little things. I was just like, I love you. I love this character so much.
That's
Like, there's so
awesome.
much fun and levity, even though it deals with such dark taboo issues. Like even by the end, I was like, I really understand where the hero came from, and seeing what happens with the family and kind of what happens in the present versus the past. I really like that how that was handled too. I was like, okay, and like you do feel at the end, like he is working towards a happily ever after. Like
Right.
he's gonna be somewhat all right.
Right. I think that he just needed to, he had never really had a normal influence. You know what I mean? He was raised in this crazy home and then kind of went off on his own for a little bit and then met Fink, and he had never really had the chance to be normal. So, and I think meeting, knowing Sarah and knowing that she was going through those things, that was one thing that I was worried that people were not going to be able to forgive him for, because he knew this stuff was happening and he let it happen. But to him, it was just kind of like in the background, like he didn't really think much about it until it was like in his face. And then he realized, okay, this is wrong. You know what I mean? But it was a law that they don't really, you mind your business.
Yeah.
No.
And I think for readers, I think because there's so many other things going on, it also is in the background. So it's like, I didn't really, it wasn't in the forefront of my thinking, like, can I forgive you for this? And do I, you know what I mean? It wasn't that. And I think it was a satisfactory culmination of everything. And justifiably, I felt Sarah's anger at the outcome of some things that happened that were taken from her and how she felt about things. But everything, again, like I said, came to a satisfactory ending. And so I think readers, once you read it through and you see everything, you're understanding and you're forgiving of that. But there are so many other things we have to deal with. We're like, we'll get to that.
I was like, we have a list. We have like other things. We have like the corpses thing. We can get to everything else at some point. Like we need to process these things. Like we have a list that we have to work through. Like we will get there.
You'll get there eventually. Yeah, and then it just kind of ended up being like a sweet little ending. Like
I was like, from when you start the book and when you finish it, I was like, I would have never like. That's why like I trust you to lead me on any journey you write, because I know you're going to get me to the place where I'm like, that was kind of sweet.
Yeah.
I was like, that's kind of sweet. I'm like,
sweet. Like, okay, it is.
I love that you're able to turn that completely, do like a 180 from where you started in the beginning. You're like, you're like most people who read the book are like, no, 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 sorry, I'm out. But if you stick with it, you're like, oh, okay. You find out the reasons, and you end up actually really loving the
Mhm.
hero. I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
I was like, you work your match. Like, I will never doubt you, Charity.
I think that the reviews. Will you give me a charger? The reviews for Skeleton King are my favorite reviews because they are hysterical. I had one girl that was like, "Doe, I don't like that word now."
She's like, I'm done.
Like, I'm done.
I don't like that word now. And I had one girl that DNF'd at 2%.
Mm.
That made me laugh because she was like, "Nope, 2%. I ain't doing it."
You haven't even got through. You're not even in the prologue.
You're like just like a couple of pages in.
Like the second page.
You're like, I'm done. I'm like, well, hang on.
That's why I love like reviews for dark romance or like super spicy books.
Mm.
Like,
They are
when I see, like,
hilarious.
they're so funny. Like watching them be offended. I'm like, I didn't know this would be so full of sex and all this innuendo. Like it burned my eyes. I'm like, that'd be like, okay.
What click?
That's what got me to read. I read Anne Rice's The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty because I read a review and somebody was like, this is rape porn and this is this and that. And I was like, well, what's the name of that?
So, okay.
That's like dark romance. That's like dark romance readers when you describe a taboo book. They're like, okay, what was in it? Okay, what was the name? I'm not gonna read it, but everyone takes notes, like going like, okay, we'll all keep each other in the loop.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
sure.
so funny.
But that is evident in, like, for example, like I said, in The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty, it's evident that that person did not read that entire series and did not read it through to see what the whole story, because that's not at all what it's about. It's about a completely different thing, and it's fantastic. And you just miss out on that if you just start from the beginning, and jump off the bandwagon and just jump off and say I'm done. You know,
Yeah.
everybody does different things, so that's fine.
And not only that, I mean, you can literally read the exact same book, and 5 different people are gonna read. It's gonna be a different book to 5 different people. You know what I mean? Like, people just read things differently and take different things from different sentences are going to stand out, to them that aren't going to stand out to other people and things like that. So I find it very interesting how one person will say, "Oh, I loved this about this scene or this book," and then in the next review they hated that part of it. It just really shows how diverse, people are in their opinions and their tastes.
Totally. So Charles, you made me think about it. Like when you had mentioned your favorite books, I think of everything that we've talked about. I have Desiccate, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. So I will read that, and that will be the last. And I will have read all of Charity. So I'm happy. I'm pleased to say that. I think it was a fantastic ride for me. But of the books that I have read, my favorite are R.I.P. and the Candy series, the Sweet Treats trilogy. Like I absolutely, those two were like, and I think it's because of the dynamics. And if you look at like Tavin and Tobin, and if you look at Adriel and Malachi, like there's a similarity there, with how those characters relate to one another and their stories, and coming through that and being there for each other and what that looks like. And so for me, they were fantastic rides, and I absolutely want to see more. Definitely, like we talked about in R.I.P., I'd love for you to write more in that world. And, just to see about other characters in the Sweet Treats trilogy, if you have just extra time in your life,
Right. I was going to say, I definitely have wanted to do Nikki and Master and the Benji books for so long, and the R.I.P. spinoff as well with the uncle.
Yes.
I've wanted to do also. So I just got to get the time in. It just takes so long for me. I mean, there's people that release books every couple months, and I'm like, I'm lucky to get one out a year,
Yeah. But it sounds like you're putting a lot of research and a lot of time and investment into your book, and that's why it's taking longer. And so I would much rather to have that quality and that depth there, than like to go through it. So
really quick.
Exactly. So when you're ready to release the next stuff, let us know.
I was gonna say the next one's gonna be longer because it's a duet, and I won't release book 1 without book 2 being done. So I have to write the whole series before I'll release the first book. So who knows?
But I
Gonna
appreciate
be done.
that.
I
I
appreciate
love
it, so
that
you don't have to
because
wait
yeah,
that long.
Yeah, and they will be released, within a couple months of each other, like 2 or 3 months of each other. So once one's done, the other one is following shortly behind, but it just takes so much longer to get there when you're writing the whole series. So it was fine with Sweet Treats because I wasn't published yet. So I could spend 3 years writing a series, but
but
I
now
don't
we're
have that luxury now.
Yeah, I feel like us as indie readers, we're like, what do you mean? I have to wait like a year and a half for book 2?
You do
What
get
is
kind
this
of spoiled because
tomfoolery?
you're used to these rapid releases,
That's
you
why
know.
Witcher Street Public like, I had to wait a year for the sequel to come out. Like, how dare you? Like, I
yeah.
want the next book in like 3 or 4 weeks. I'm
Right?
like,
Is
get
this
it together.
1994? I have to wait a year.
I'm like, and it's not up for pre-order. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, no. And audiobooks add another layer to that, right? Because now we can gobble it up so fast that as soon as it's out, I'm like, the day it's out, I've finished it. I'm like, okay,
Yep. Author could spend like 5 years writing like a 6-book trilogy, and then like we just stroll in like, okay,
Consume it in
in
a
a
day.
week, and we're like, okay, what's next? Okay, hurry up with book 7 now.
yeah, exactly. So any other like last parting things? I've taken up so much of your time, and I want to make sure.
Oh no, I've had fun.
Well, this has been so fantastic. Charles, do you have any other like last parting things that you want to burning questions?
Just thank you, Charity, for coming and talking to us. Like
Oh, thank
it
you
was
guys.
fun. And like since we're audiobook people, like when we fall down a rabbit hole with an author and we're just like reading ebooks, we're like, okay, we found something special. So thank you again so much
Thank
for
you
coming.
guys.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I really love, like I said, there are a select few authors that I've read their entire backlist, and you are among those. And so thank you for doing what you do and coming on and talking with us and just talking about your impetus and your motivation and things that are coming in the future. So I know that because there are folks, like I said, from my channel that were really excited about this interview and wanted to hear from you. So can you tell us just lastly in parting a little teaser as to what's coming up for you in terms of your releases and what that looks like time-wise?
Let's say I'm almost done with the first book, writing the first draft of the Abnormals duet, and but then I have the second book. I don't like to put a date on it because I very rarely am going to make it by that date.
No
but
way.
I am hoping to have at least the first book out, within 6 months is, my goal. Yeah.
And
So,
is it going to be as a dark psychological? Is it taboo? Is it paranormal? What genre?
It's dark. It's dark dystopian. It's set it's actually set in the future, but it's not like futuristic. Like it's in 2136, after a major worldwide event. And so this is during 100 years later. So they're healing, they're rebuilding, and so it's not like. There are societies and there are, things are getting put back together. So it's not like what you would think of like walking through the desert or something like that. They live in normal houses and stuff. And it's actually about a freak show that a traveling freak show because a lot of people are having abnormalities born, it's getting worse. More people are born with abnormalities. So the abnormals are kind of shunned and seen as subhuman. And there's a lot of recording when people are born, they're put into their classes. And, there's just a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of detail in this series. And I am having so much fun with it. But there's the gas mask imagery and, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited about it.
Oh, very cool.
Really
I'm getting
good.
Burning Man vibes here, but I like it that on this. So that'll be so cool. Fantastic.
I started writing it actually back in 2018, and then I had all these other projects that got in the way. So I'm finally able to get back to it. So I've been talking about this series for years. So I'm so happy to be able to get to it.
I can't wait to get into my hot little hands. So this has been a fantastic interview, Charity. Super fun. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us. We really appreciate it. And this is for you guys. If you guys have any questions, please put it in the comments below. We'll try and answer those. And we thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Charity. Have a good night.